Establishing a claim of negligence requires proving 5 distinct elements: a duty of care, a breach of that duty, actual cause, proximate cause, and damages. This analysis focuses on the second pillar, the breach. Breach of duty occurs when a defendant's conduct fails to meet the required standard of care, the measure of what a reasonable person would have done under the same or similar circumstances. Assessing this failure requires an objective analysis. Courts cannot rely on a jury's personal feelings or hindsight empathy to determine if a specific action was unreasonable. To maintain this objectivity, the legal system employs a hypothetical construct, the reasonably prudent person. A defendant's actions are weighed against how this ordinary, careful individual would have navigated the situation. This conceptual knot shows the 4 frameworks used to define unreasonableness: the reasonably prudent person standard driven by foreseeability, the hand formula for risk calculus, negligence per se, and res ipsa loquitur. These rigid analytical structures transform the amorphous concept of human error into a testable, quantifiable metric for the courts. The reasonably prudent person standard relies on foreseeability. An individual generally does not breach a duty regarding a risk they could not reasonably anticipate. An Indiana Consolidated Insurance Company versus Mathew, Robert Mathew attempted to start his brother's 8-year-old Toro riding mower inside a garage. He had checked the gas gauge, filled the tank carefully using a funnel, and waited 20 minutes before turning the key. Upon starting the engine, Mathew saw a flame under the hood. He shut off the mower immediately, but the machine began spewing gasoline. Fearing the tank would explode, Mathew abandoned the machine to call the fire department. The resulting fire destroyed the garage, and the insurance company sued for negligence, claiming he should have pushed the mower outside. The court applied this sudden emergency doctrine. When an individual faces an unexpected crisis, not of their own making, the standard of care adjusts to what a prudent person would do under the pressure of that specific emergency. The trial court found that Mathew did not act negligently. The sudden fire was entirely unforeseeable. The appellate court affirmed this, noting that the law values human life above property. His decision to retreat rather than risk an explosion was an exercise of ordinary prudence. Since the event was unforeseeable and life-threatening, the failure to save the structure did not constitute a breach. Unforeseeable emergencies alter the standard of care required to protect property. Foreseeability is dynamic and can activate a new duty of care based on a defendant's prior observations, as seen in Pfeiffer v. Parcell. The scenario involved 3 teenagers sitting across the front bench seat of a pickup truck traveling at 55 miles per hour. Without warning, the passenger in the middle, Beisel, grabbed the steering wheel, causing the truck to veer onto the shoulder. The driver, Parcell, regained control but did not admonish Beisel, pull over, or remove the risk. He and Beisel simply laughed at the incident. 30 seconds later, Beisel grabbed the wheel a second time. This caused the truck to crash, injuring the third passenger. The court distinguished the 2 events. While the first grab was unforeseeable, the second was predictable. Once the driver was on notice of the danger, he had a duty to exercise reasonable care to protect his passengers from a repeat occurrence. Once a dangerous variable reveals itself, the legal duty to prevent its recurrence activates. Ignoring that notice constitutes a breach. In industrial environments, risk is often an inherent, ongoing factor. Measuring a breach in these contexts requires an economic calculation of reasonableness. Judge Lonthand sought to formalize this process by creating an algebraic formula to assess negligence. He applied this calculus in United States v. Carroll Towing Co., a case involving a multi-barge flotilla shifting in a congested wartime harbor. A barge named the Anna C. broke loose and sank after hitting a tanker. Its attendant, or bargee, had been away for 21 hours during daylight working hours, leaving no one to call for help when the vessel began to leak. Hand's formula weighs the burden of precautions against the probability of harm and gravity of the loss. Here, L was a sunken barge, P was substantial in a crowded harbor, B was simply requiring the attendant aboard during the day. Because the burden of keeping an attendant on board was less than the probability of the accident multiplied by the magnitude of the loss, the failure to do so was a breach. Modern analysis often adds social utility, or SU, to the equation to evaluate the societal benefit of the risk-creating activity. High social utility, such as an ambulance speeding to an emergency, increases the weight on the left side of the equation, which can negate a finding of breach. The hand calculus reduces unreasonableness to an objective calculation of risk management and economic efficiency. Return to the master conceptual map to address situations where the law bypasses the need to calculate individual foreseeability or algebraic burdens. Negligence per se applies when a legislature has codified a safety statute. In these cases, the law adopts that statute as the definitive standard of care. Violating the statute and causing the exact harm it was meant to prevent establishes a breach as a matter of law. Res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself, is used when direct evidence is missing, but the nature of the accident implies a departure from reasonable care. These doctrines streamline the analysis, removing the requirement for a flexible, reasonably prudent person debate when the violation of a statute or the facts of the accident are absolute. Industry custom, the consistent practice of a particular trade, is a final complicating factor in the analysis of a breach. Custom provides evidence of the burden of avoidance in the hand formula. If an industry uses a specific safety device, the burden of adopting it is presumably low. However, compliance is not a complete defense. A jury may find an entire industry's standard practice unreasonable. The determination of whether conduct was unreasonable is almost always a matter of fact decided by a jury. A judge will rule on a breach as a matter of law only if the facts are so one-sided that reasonable minds could not possibly disagree. Determining a breach requires an objective balancing of foreseeable risk against the practical burdens of prevention.